Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen students of color to prepare for grad school. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Fu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into and successfully navigate grad school. For over 10 years, I've been helping first-gen students of color get into top grad programs in their field, and I'm really excited to support you on your academic journey too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette, and today we're going to be talking about how we nurture queer, non-binary, Central American, and undocumented students in higher ed. Our special guest happens to be one of my favorite people. Their name is Rony Eduardo Castellanos Raymundo, and I've had the privilege to work with them more closely in the last year. Rony is a queer, non-binary, Central American, formerly undocumented, and a higher education professional. Rony was born in Guatemala and migrated to the U.S. at age 15. Through mentors, teachers, professors, and the love from their community, they have not only earned their degrees from West LA Community College, UC Santa Barbara, and UCLA, but have been nurtured to continue to resist and exist. They enjoy dancing, karaoke, coffee shops, nature, rivers, and being by water, as well as creating a different future for the communities they serve. They're currently working at CSU Dominguez Hills as the program director for La Casita, Latinx Cultural Resource Center. La Casita provides holistic support services to Latinx students to complete their higher education degree and soar beyond college. Welcome to the show, Rony.
Thank you, Doctora Yvette Martinez-Fu. It is a pleasure to be here with you and an honor to be part of a beautiful Femtoring podcast. So muchas gracias. Thank you for having me.
Muchas gracias a ti. I'm so happy to have you here today. And I would love for you to get us started by sharing a little bit more about who you are, what you do, your background, your backstory, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I have a long name, but which I'm really now proud to say out loud. I think that when I migrated to the US was more of a first and last name, right? And so I think there's been a lot of beautiful work on saying Rony Eduardo Castellanos Raymundo, he, they pronounce, and being able to get where I'm at, right? And knowing that that wasn't where I was 10 years ago. And so it's been beautiful, as you share, being able to be nurtured by the people, the community. And so for me, community is really important. I am the oldest of 3 siblings. My family remains in Guatemala, so mostly my mother and my sisters, and my father lives in the US, as well as other family members. So I think when you think about family separation or living across Latin America, different borders, is something that it's always mindful and dear to me, because those experiences are very different. And I think as I began to explore a little bit more of my identity, I began to feel more comfortable. And so I think even as I'm saying this to you right now, I feel so happy for my younger self to say, to vision of the self now, and being able to say, hey, like, thank you for everything you did. And even if you were scared at that time, because of you at that time, I'm able to be here. And so that's a little bit more about me. On the fun side, I feel that I'm always moving around. If I could, I wanted to be a dancer. That was one of my dreams.
I love that.
But I'm always playing music. I'm always thinking and having ideas and sharing. And I just love to be surrounded by people. And of course, I love my own time, but I always enjoy being in community. So that's one of the biggest things for me.
Great. So today we're talking about a lot of different things, and I would love to hear a little bit more about maybe your higher ed journey and a little bit about mentorship and support. And I know you said community is really big for you. And so if you can talk a little bit about that, and then maybe we can talk about mentorship as it relates to other folks who might also have intersecting marginalized or intersecting underrepresented or oppressed identities in higher ed. So maybe a little bit about you, and then we can kind of tie it into, supporting other folks who might be navigating similar experiences.
Yeah. One of the things, I actually was on a panel this past Monday with a couple of colleagues for what they were calling now newcomers, right? So students who are in high school, who migrated to the US. And so they're learning more about and building that community right here. And so one of the things that I remember saying was they they were asking, what can you share with us to motivate us or to stay motivated? And so I realized that that was not only more than 3 times that was asked. So I feel that nowadays, when you want to connect this to the mental health, which is really important because I'm someone who still struggles with depression, anxiety, and also challenge myself to know that in order to heal, I may have to do the things that I don't want to do, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
maybe seeking therapy or seeking community or asking for support when I don't feel like it, right? And so, for example, I think when it comes to undocumented students or queer folks, there's not one way to be, right? So there's many complexities of that journey. As policies and things change in the country, but also in Latin America, in the world, right? And so I think about, for example, when I migrated to the US, I was 15 years old. And I think that something that I'm challenging myself to do is, we always hear about the sad stories or the tragic stories of migration, immigration. And then we hear the other side of I'm falling into the good immigrant narrative, right? Which is I do well in school. I am the immigrant that's shining, right? And then I know artists like Julio Salgado, who've done a lot of undocumented art, Sima Reyes, right? So folks who have been doing some of that work, really inspired. And I also have not seen myself as a Central American and Guatemalan person in some of that work, right? And so I know there's a collective of folks out there doing that. But I think that one of the things that I think about is also, what does it mean to not be a good immigrant, right? Folks that maybe didn't have a chance to go higher ed, or it wasn't because they didn't want to, right? And so there is really challenging that idea. Because for me, my dad, when I came to the US, I came to live in South Central Los Angeles, and he's a construction worker. And he was very adamant about, you need to be enrolled in school. And so just a little bit of that very quickly. I crossed the border twice. And so one of the challenging things was that I was released to my dad under the condition that I had to go to immigration court once a month to check in with them, right? And so I think that was at the beginning of seeing how the systems work, not to support folks, right? But to figure out how to remove them or displace them. And so in order to remain, I had to be enrolled in school and be a good student. And so I think that was some of the things that I was challenged, right? Because without even knowing, I was falling into this, like, look at Rony, he's learning English, he's doing so well, and this good immigrant narrative, right? And so, being here, I remember I was sharing this week how I used to cry. And I said, I did not want to be here. I want to go back to my mom, to my sisters. The comida, the food was not the same. And so I think that, and the cultura, right? So, and here in South Central LA, we have Black African-American folks, and then some Central American folks, right? So even to find that Central American cultura or culture was a little rough because it's very pockets in different areas of LA. But simply to go back to your question, I think that, for example, mentorship became very important. And so when I enrolled Manual Arts High School, and then we had a neighbor that was working at a charter school, and she came to our parents and said, hey, this charter school is better than this school. You should put your children there. So funny enough, I'm also a product of a charter school system, which is a whole nother thing I found out once I, started to learn more about different systems of education. And when I arrived to the school was Bright Star, and we were the first ever class to graduate. We were about 20 seniors, and I was placed in 10th grade. And so I remember not knowing much about English. One thing that they said was, don't talk to Rony in Spanish. Like, he has to learn English. And so I think from that moment, it became interesting to me that my bilingualism or my second language was something that had to be suppressed, as well as my voceo, right, which is how you say voz in Central American. So I think that was also an identity kind of crisis in a way. because then I started to adapt some sort of Mexican accent. And so when I would call my mom, she'll say,
Wow.
oh, sonas como mexicano, right? And so, and you know, to vocear, I would say vos to my
Oh,
dad or her,
sí.
and you get shamed, or I used to get shamed for that, right? And so when I got there, I remember having teachers who really were very intentional about, they would see how much I would struggle, but they would help me. And so I think that's where it started. And so I have one particular mentor, her name is Sandy Chavez, who used to be my English teacher in high school, and who took me under her wing. And interestingly enough, this is kind of getting a little bit ahead, but she and I, as we became mentors and we transitioned to being friends, we ended up both being at UCLA at the same time. So she was
Wow.
her educational doctorate and I was finishing my master's. And so we ended up graduating together. And for our sashes, we had one that said mentor and the other one that said mentee. So I think it's been
Oh,
so, yeah, it was so beautiful to like never imagine that, you know, someone so pivotal like her, like helping me apply to college, what we were going to end up, you know, working together. So I think the gift of mentorship comes in many ways and many genders and many forms. I also learned about mentorship being transformational and reciprocal. And so one of the things that she really worked on with me was there isn't one way to, like, the mentor holds more knowledge than the mentee. It's like we're really both learning from each other and evolving. So that's
yes.
really beautiful, and apply it to like the different ways that not only work, but that I move in community.
Wow.
That was
Wow.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, a couple of things. The first thing that I heard was you talking about the complexities of, you know, the immigrant experience and challenging the like good immigrant, what is it, the narrative,
Yeah.
and allowing space for nuance, allowing space for different experiences. But then at the same time, having to navigate a very difficult system that's trying to push you out, that's trying to send you back, and
Yeah.
having to do things that still follow that narrative as a means of survival. And then
Yeah.
along the line, finding individuals that are able to support and help and nurture and to build community. And then
Yeah.
that beautiful full circle moment of you graduating with your mentor, and having this beautiful reciprocal lateral relationship. So that's really, really beautiful. And I feel like you already kind of in some way started to answer the next question that I was going to ask, is having to do with how do we support students who are navigating multiple types of identities, multiple underrepresented, or however you want to call them, like marginalized, underrepresented, or oppressed identities in higher ed spaces, and even outside of that, because I mean, we're talking about nurturing specifically queer students, non-binary students, Central American students, undocumented students. All of those are like each one in and of itself can be its own topic, its own episode, its own research, its own everything. But I think it's important to mention all of them at once, because it's also part of that conversation of the complexity and the nuance of our identities. And
Yeah.
you happen to have one of these experiences, but there are, I'm sure, other folks out there who are going to listen to this episode and feel seen, heard, represented. You know how you said earlier, you're like, I've seen some folks who are doing this work, who are also Central American, who are also this and that, who are also queer, but I don't see myself represented. So I would love maybe to talk about a little bit more about that, about like, you know, what other types of narratives, what other types of identities, what other types of experiences can be represented. And I guess because you're also in higher ed, yeah, going back to continuing to support these populations, like maybe expanding on that too.
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, the first thing that came to mind when you said that, because like, for example, today I have more of a beard, right? Sometimes I wear my lipstick, I do my makeup.
A beautiful purple scarf.
You know, and feel free, like I really want this to be a back and forth, so feel free to interject as well. Pero to be honest, I think one of the things is like I never thought that I will right now, really stepping into the non-binariness, if you will. I've questioned, I'm like, am I trans? That's one thing that I always think of. And then that's the beautiful thing about, I wish in the systems and cis world that people were more comfortable about exploring their identities, their gender, their sexuality, so that they're not just so binary, right? There's this things here and there, but there is a spectrum and there is a beauty in that. I would not be able to be where I'm at today had it not also been for the undergraduate students at UC Santa Barbara. So just to kind of like give you a little bit of context there. So when I unfortunately, right, my dad had a lot of very machista ideologies and things that I now have a beautiful relationship with my dad, who's like, working, but at the time, unfortunately, I had to be I was kicked out of my home, right, when I was 19 by him, and that's when my mentors took me in. And when it comes to the challenges, right, that folks in different identities face or communities, so housing, it's one, right, housing stability. And so right now where I live, it's probably been the most consistent housing I've ever had after my arrival here. And so learning through that, and then moving through not having a work permit to work. And then, when DACA, right, in 2012 came about, and then those that get the access to qualify to apply, that was life-changing, to getting a work permit. And so once I got that going, I remember saving to buy, I was working at Jack in the Box in Compton, and I used to take my bike to West LA College, take the bus. But then I bought me this green Toyota Corolla for like $1,000, and that car never left me. And it was my ride or die, for real. And I remember going to, West LA College.
So many of us had Toyota Corollas. I'm saying.
It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful car ever to me, And I remember, going to, and that's why I always joke around saying like the Los Angeles Community District Marathon, right? Because it was going to not one, not two, it's like 5, 6 different ones, because I was working full time to sustain myself. And so I think that a lot of things about higher ed is about this kind of traditional path, right? Like you graduate high school, and then you go to 4 years, and then you go to master's. So my journey didn't look like that, right? And so
traditional students también, and what do they look like?
Exactly.
A specific age, a specific race, a specific gender, specific, sexuality, you name it, etc.
Yeah. And so I remember, I went to CSUN after high school, and my dad helped me pay. I remember it was $2,500, and he helped me. So that's why, even though my relationship with my dad is very complex, I'm always, when I have a chance, I call him and I say, I just want to say thank you. Our relationship is not the greatest, and yet I can still recognize the things you did for me so that I can be here, and so, but I wasn't able to think about this, in my younger years. But, so I started at CSUN, and then I had to leave because my dad was, found out, or asked me. That sounds funny.
Was this before West LA College?
This is way before. So when I was in high school, we used to go to West LA Community College, because we did some sort of dual enrollment where we would take units so that when you would, go to college, you already had. So that's how I became familiar what community college was. And so when I got kicked out and my dad stopped helping me paying me for my education, there wasn't DACA. This was fall 2010. And I remember, I can go back to that place, community college, West LA, and then transfer. And that's when I first heard the words transfer, right? And so long story short, I worked for about 6 years, and I attended different community colleges until the time came to transfer, right? And so my mentors at the time said, why don't you try the UCs? And I'm like, girl, I have a 2.7 GPA. There's no way, right? But then there's like deficit thinking that we think about different things, right? That we're imposed most of the time. And I was supposed to go to Casita Dominguez Hills, which I had applied. interestingly. And so I ended up applying to UC Santa Barbara, Berkeley, and UCLA. And when I was in high school, some students from UCLA came to do a presentation. So I had like, oh my God, that's my dream school. So I actually ended up getting accepted into UC Santa Barbara. And at the time, the California Dream Act, which is the Help for Undocumented Students in Financial Aid, had come out. And so interestingly, the power of mentorship networks, my community college counselor had a sister that used to work in residential life. And she said, why didn't you tell me you were applying that you got in? And I said, I didn't know I was going to get in. So the power of community. So she said, let me call my sister, send her your resume, and we'll figure out a way to see where we can get you a job. And so I ended up actually getting a job in residential life as a resident director to support a whole building of undergrads.
I didn't know this part of your story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that paid for my room and board. So think about, right, it was like I got
that's huge, especially in Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then I'm also this non-traditional student, right? So I'm 25. I'm transferring. They're like, who is this brown, fat, like person coming over here? Like, but I love the community that I built with the RAs. And that's how we were able to survive. You know, Santa Barbara is it's a predominantly white school too. And so being able to build that community. And so long story short, I think what I wanted to get at was that when I got to UCSB was the first time that I saw queer and trans students be so unapologetic about who they were. And I'm like, wow, like this exists.
Nice,
and so
yes.
I would have not been able to explore my identities had it not been for those undocumented queer trans students who were so unapologetic. And so, you know, I felt like I'm like old, like, why should I do any of this? But that's how I ended up really exploring more my identity. And so that's how we created a club for undocu-queer and undocu-trans students. You know, shout out to Diana Valdivia, who also helped us out tremendously at the time.
She's been on the podcast.
Oh, she's
on about to come
too,
out
right?
a second time. I've recorded with her too, so she's going to come out before yours, so folks will know who she is.
So that would reference.
So that means you got to come a second time too. So
right, please. I'll save some for the next time.
Exactly. Shout out to Diana.
And so, you know, as I'm sharing this with you, I'm reflecting and just thinking about, I would never really gotten to explore. For example, I remember I was going to a conference called the Presente conference. And it was the first time I really put like my lipstick on, like someone was like teaching me how to do it, like the students. And these are younger students, right? And so talking about disrupting that idea of like, who knows more than one, right? Age. The first time I met Bambi Salcedo, I saw like Latinx or Latine queer and trans folks, and I was like, wow, like to me it was just a new world. And so now, you know, thinking about how to support students in many different ways, I obviously try not to generalize, right, my own experience, but I use that as a starting point to say, these are the different ways in which we can think beyond what we know, to support students who may have not just different identities, but experiences, and they may be affected by different systems, not just of oppression, but that exist in higher ed. And, you know, jokingly, I remember like pushing administrators when I was an undergrad. And as I become an administrator myself, I also find myself being pushed. And so I think that's been beautiful.
Ooh, I want you to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And so I jokingly, I'm like, oh, damn, I also became the devil, right? I always thought about that, like, oh my gosh, how, like, you know, you're here. But I think there's a level of privilege. And I think that I'd be learning to become more strategic and allow the students to know and be transparent as much as I can. Here are my limitations. And here's what you can do. And here's what we can do together. And so instead of hiding and not, you know, I think that's often what happens, that oftentimes administrators or systems are being asked, we need this, what are you doing? And I think sometimes they give a big fluffy answer to say, we're not there yet. And I think that's something that I would appreciate more, is for folks to say, you know what, we don't know. And I rather tell them, no, we don't know, or here's how I'm trying to figure it out, than try to make people believe that there is work happening behind the scenes with maybe there isn't any work yet.
Yeah.
And so I know that's rough, but I think that in this work, I remember someone used to say, like, it's about life and death. Like, these are students' lives. These are our
Yeah.
lives too.
Yeah.
And so as it is a big responsibility, I'm often reminded of, like, what can I do? And
Mhm.
sometimes, we had a keynote speaker for a Lavender grad. His name is Marcus, and please forgive me. And he talked about, like, my work is my activism. And I thought about how activism looks very different, right? And us, the work that I do now, making sure that the students continue to attend, that we get them the resources, that may be my activism, right? I may
Yeah.
have the time to be out in the streets,
Same.
but we have to redefine that.
I love that you said that, because I always had a complicated relationship with owning my own sense of activism because of my own identities as someone who was chronically ill and struggling with internalized ableism and struggling with my mental health, and knowing that the certain settings trigger my flare-ups and trigger my mental health issues, and wanting so badly to do that work, but knowing it would come at a really big cost. And so then learning to redefine it and to figure out the ways in which I can use my gifts and my strengths in
Mhm.
that service of activism and of others and promoting social justice, that has been a big game changer for me in my life. And I'm glad that you're mentioning that you can work within the system, you can work outside of the system. You just got to figure out the ways that work best for you. And I know that, like, now you have this role as a director, so you've worked your way up to this point of working for La Casita, and I want to hear a little bit more about that, about the support, about the resources. I know you said this is a place that provides holistic support. I love that, because I think we need to see and support folks as whole human beings, not just as students and academics. So what kind of services, what kind of support, like, how have you essentially designed this space? Or I know that this is all your labor of love. So I want to hear more about, for folks who don't know about this process of developing this space and providing these services, because I know you've done a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. No, and I think one thing I want to say thank you to you. It's funny enough, from my classmates and undergrad at UCSB, I always heard a lot about you, right?
I
And
don't
so,
even know from who.
yeah, I mean,
Ya ni me
I mean,
acuerdo.
but there were some people who, like, who you're gonna meet. You're gonna meet
Oh,
Yvette. You gotta, and I'm like, and somehow I remember we became connected, And one thing
I
that I
remember
appreciate,
our cafecito. I do remember that.
yes, and I was like,
At
like,
IB, yeah.
and without knowing, right? Like, shout out to, like, Malapan Famasa from the Transfer Student
Oh,
Center,
yeah.
like, just so many people who became very pivotal for me making it. Like, I had my last weeks of undergrad, really quickly, I was so scared because I think I had reached what I had longing for so long, which was like, oh my gosh, am I really gonna graduate? Am I gonna fail that class? Is the assignment gonna prevent me? It was like everything that you can think of came to me
I think a
about,
lot
like,
of us have that. That last year and that last quarter for me, I was like, I'm gonna fail everything. Like,
yeah,
everything in the world that can go wrong is gonna go wrong. It's not gonna happen.
they were like, it's not gonna happen for me, right? And I think one of the things that I appreciate that you mentioned was around, like, chronic illness.
Mhm.
And so I remember for me, as Santa Barbara was also community center, was also a little bit challenging, where I feel like that's where I developed, I'm diabetic, right? So I have diabetes type 2. And I appreciate you saying that, because it reminds me of making more visibility for chronic illnesses that maybe people be like, oh, because of your eating, or because it's sometimes family history. And honestly, the way that I can think of it, this is also a systemic, like, issue.
Yes, definitely.
And I remember being depressed and just not feeling good. And I think now that I think about it, I wish what I know now would have known then, to really, like, hug myself and take care of myself more.
Mm.
And I have a grace for that right now. But I think about how these illnesses also affect us, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, and this is how I want to tie into La Casita. So I was brought in as an emergency hire in fall 2020. So a group of students, Dominguez Hills, created a proposal, right, to push administration to say we're over 63% Latinx students on campus. There isn't a resource center for us. Why? So shout out to Janet Nájera, who was a student, and Dr. Corina Benavides Lopez, Chair Chicano Studies right now at CSU DH, who really supported the students in finding a vision and really come up with a plan. They had a whole plan. And I was so, wow. And so I think for me, it was beautiful to be brought on as an emergency hire and to honor the work of Jeanette as a queer transfer student, non-traditional. And so I think if something that I can say for the record is thinking about oftentimes a lot of the change in the world or in the communities happens or comes from like Black, brown, queer, trans communities. And I think that's not really said a lot. And so I think about like Jeanette and the way that she was able to bring the center. And when I came in, we were in the middle of COVID, but we started to build community online. And I know that you were one of our guests as well, right? To support our students in their visions about graduate school, or if they were not thinking about graduate school, thinking about all the ways in which they can move, right, during that time. And so La Casita, one of the things that even our symbol of colibri, right? Thinking about centering healing and wellness for our students at the core, because most of the time we're running around trying to achieve the degree, but that gap between this is where I'm starting and when I get there's a lot that happens, right? So for me, I'm always interested in the process rather than like, okay, we can get to the goal for sure by any means necessary, but what's happening in the in between. And so for me, it was really essential to tie in wellness, well-being, that the center is an anti-racist center or centering, right, like things like critical race theory to really analyze the ways in which students are navigating that. But, I can't go out and say like, there's racism and students listen. So there's very, very different dynamic ways in which we invite our students to learn about more. And also disrupting that English is a dominant language, right? And culture of white America, and thinking about even the more that we advertise things in Spanish or the Spanglish or the pochaness, right?
Yeah.
And making space, because oftentimes it'd be like, well, I don't know how to speak Spanish, so I'm not Latino enough. And so I often think of Alan Peláez Lopez, who, challenging the meaning of Latinidad and really knowing that Latinidad has excluded Black folks, queer, trans folks. And bueno, to sum it up, I think about what are the holistic services, right? And so what are some of the things that we're trying to do different is from the moment the students walking in our center, doing our best that the physical space of the center is representative of not just one culture, right? So the decentralized Mexicanness, right? To allow that there is other cultures, other ways to see Latinidad, challenge it, build it, throw it in a blender, as Lady Gaga will say, put it out, do the things, but in a way that they can come in the space, whether they can do homework, they can take off their backpack, can sit on a couch, watch a movie, listen to some music, rest, attend a workshop, things that, provide snacks to support food insecurity to our students. And so I think that it's been beautiful to see the space still transform, right? So we're still building and advocating to make sure that in the center we have, for example, not just like graduate school workshops, but we're talking about mental health, we're talking about anti-Blackness and all the different things, but in ways that are going to be digestible, yet push the students to think beyond. And I think more than anything, I would not be able to do anything without my student team. And so my colleagues who really are critical and see the needs of our students. And so hopefully La Casita also challenges that idea of home. Because home is not a safe space for everyone. But if in this campus or in this, right, this campus can be a moment to redefine what that can mean for somebody. Maybe in this space, my home is different. Something to me. So if anything, that's what we're trying to achieve, and so we still have a lot to go since we're very brand new, but I'm excited to And to go back to the chronic illness, I think that this work has been the work that has really saved me.
Mm.
I think especially during the pandemic, being queer and living by myself, like when I had COVID, I was literally, my dad came to drop off food or friends, and I would see him through the window, like when it was at the height of the pandemic, and the isolation for queer and trans people is real, right?
Yeah.
And so that was an impact to that. But like, I can truly say that the work at La Casita has been so restorative, and it fills me up with motivation and purpose.
You can feel it. You can sense it. There's that energy when I hear you, when I see you, even following y'all on social media, I just get this sense of care and nurturing and of comfort and home. And I love that. I really, really love that. And I'm glad that you shared this aloud, because this is one example of the potential for many other spaces that can shape and develop and create other places that are like this, or that are representative of other populations that need that same kind of care and nurturing and safe space, or like a home away from home. Or like you said, for some of us went to college because we were trying to run away from our homes, I
Exactly.
myself included. So I laugh when I'm thinking about something that's uncomfortable, but thank you for calling attention to that, and for doing the best that you can to create this type of space for a lot of students that need it, while at the same time serving as a role model to others to work on yourself, to work on your own healing. I know that's not easy. So I just want to like commend you for that, and for continuing to do that work, the self work. It's not just, you're not just working just for a system, you're not just working just for the community, because a lot of folks do a lot of really amazing community work at the expense of themselves. And so you're doing the work of like that cycling between all the different commitments, and also your commitment to yourself and your self-worth and your self-love. So I think I want to ask you for advice for folks who are, finding themselves in the situation that you were at when you were going to college, and when you said like, oh, if I could go back to and tell myself something, I would like hug myself, or I would care for myself, I would embrace myself in this way. So for folks who are at that moment in their time when they're still trying to find themselves, they're still trying to fully embrace themselves and all of who they are, and don't 100% feel represented in the spaces that they're part of, what kind of advice would you provide for them?
Yeah, no, thank you again for that question. It's everything's connected. It's so weird.
See, it's all interconnected, everything.
Because this week, and we know, I was telling you I was part of this panel, right? So we were three professionals sharing about how they came to the US and how they made it, and the tips, right, the students. And so I think for me, something that was beautiful is that even back in 2015, 2010, there wasn't public, like, being able to talk about, hey, I'm depressed, or I'm feeling the difference between I'm feeling anxious, or I may be confusing exhaustion for depression. Because in this country, it's this need to grind. And so I'm also deprogramming, right? Shout out to that ministry about how to shift that. And especially higher ed student affairs. I am so sorry, but as much as I wish I could work 40 hours and just be like done, sometimes we're pushed, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been a challenge. So how do people talk about like, oh, let's how do you work-life balance? And so I think for me, it's like we have to shift slowly to say, I am gonna put myself at the center of it, right? And so if I could say, if anything of it all is thinking about the hardest battle we'll ever fight is the battle to be authentic.
Ah, yes.
And authenticity changes. So my authentic self from 5 years ago, it's very different than my authentic self from now. And so if I can give myself that adventure, that kind of, I'm not into roller coasters, but sure, life has given me one, taking me on one. But to feel the things in your stomach, to feel the things in our bodies, to envision ourselves, to imagine, and I always say this, right? Another future is possible. And the future is
Yes.
now, right? And so thinking about when I'm depressed or when I'm feeling unmotivated, I think about, all right, so what are things that can maybe not shift me quickly, like, oh, be happy, but move through that feeling. I think it's being able
Yes.
to, there's days, I'm not gonna lie, there's days I'm like, I'm tired,
Ay, yo también.
right?
Yeah.
But and to name that, like, I'm exhausted, and we don't have
Yeah.
to be like, oh, you're being negative, but it's more like, let me share out loud.
Mhm.
Like, I'm feeling exhausted, yet I want to heal, yet I want to get
Yeah.
myself grounded. And so I think being able to get to know us, like, I feel like we're owed that time, we're owed that, like, artistic, for example, like me, you always find me singing. And even though I may not be the greatest singer, but I sing to myself. Like, music is really important to me, culture is very important to me. But I don't think that I got to really know that had I not really been questioning or pushing myself, right? And so I think that, if anything, the big piece is like getting to know who we are and being okay that that changes over time, right? And so there's not one way to look non-binary. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to share with you.
Yes.
Of folks think about, like, oh, you're trans, you have to look a certain way, or you have to dress a certain way. Or people, like, for example, someone yesterday asked me, they were like, so where's your lipstick? And I'm like, okay,
So
so
what,
you
you expect me to wear lipstick
right,
now?
right. And I was like, wait, what?
Oh, hell no. It's like I
No.
should have been like, why didn't you shave or something? I don't know,
And I was like, I
ridiculous like
know.
that.
And I think it's because it's of this obsession of, like, okay, man or woman, or people confuse gender for sex, right? Or like, you have to, like,
Yeah.
you're a female, you're a male. And honestly, it's tiring, right? To have to tell people of that taxation of, like, okay, here I have to explain. But I've learned to pick and choose my battles. And
Oh
I
my
think,
gosh, that's really,
Mhm.
I say that all the time to folks, no matter what their battles are, we all have our battles, right? For me, it might be chronic illness, it might be neurodivergence, it might be, you name it. For you, it might be gender, it might be, being brown, whatever it is, like we all have our battles, but you got to pick and choose them because we can't be in fight mode all the time.
And that's the biggest. I feel like when I came out of UCSB, I was like this angry queer. I was like, yes, we'll fight. And I think I also took a thing on my health, right? And
Yeah.
so, yes, anger can be also used as a form of healing. And at the same time, we have to, do some math. So I think about that. I'm like, I'm not picking you today. I
Not
know that that's
today.
where you're at,
Yeah.
and I know where I'm at. And so
Yeah.
we're not there to engage at that level yet, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, I think that's what would be one thing about, we are owed time, we are owed experience, and in a country that every day we wake up, there's something that says, we don't want you here, anti this, anti that. Um, it's not to say I'm gonna ignore it, and that guilt, survivor's guilt, is so real.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll talk about this on episode 2.
I love
On another episode.
that.
Pero when I moved from undocumented to documented to formally undocumented, it was as if, like, oh girl, you're no longer part of the community because tienes papeles, right? Or tienes, like,
Mm.
you have a green card now. And then that's a shock. And so I know there is folks, Angie Rivera in New York, who's been working on creating ways into which, like, people can come together and talk about formally undocumented, like when you return, right?
Yeah.
Right now with folks who have advanced parole, right? So they get granted the opportunity to
Yeah.
return, and it just messes up with your mental health a
Yeah.
lot, you know? So anyways, for another episode of the podcast, but it's something I think we need to, if tomorrow everyone had access to legal status, what would happen then to those experiences?
Mm.
What would happen to, well, you're no longer undocumented, what does that mean? And so because even now that I have a green card, like there's things that I had to learn about what are the limitations of having a green card. Like I can stay out of the country for like longer because then I might not be, let in.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, right? And so, or even applying to citizenship. And I'm like, I may become a citizen of this country. Why? Like, what is that? It's a whole, proceso. But anyways, let me stop there. But for another session, but see.
Yeah, navigating the complexities of identity and experiences and how we navigate these systems and how, yeah. I definitely think that that's a whole other episode, because I'm like, I could go on and on about like identity shifts and changes in relationships, and how when your relationships change, then like when you change, your relationships change, when your relationships change, like a lot. And then there's a whole grieving process too, as you navigate all of these huge life changes. So we're getting close to wrapping up. I wanted to ask if you have any other closing words, and if not, I would like for you to share how others can reach you, for folks who want to hear more from you, who want to connect.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've always been curious about how to start an LLC, because I've seen folks do some of that work with this like consulting and workshops and different things. So right now I'm in the process of imagining what that would look like for me. I know there's like a collective of Central American poets, artists, and things like that. So I would love to bring more, not just visibility, but connect with those folks.
Yeah.
But right
I
now,
have to put you in touch with Mateo.
Please.
Mateo is the one who helped Bambi Salcedo start their nonprofit. So
oh my God.
Just we'll talk more about this after the recording.
Sí, pero folks can connect with me on LinkedIn right now, or also follow me on social media. Rony, so Rony Eduardo, and then via email, so Rony RONY.CASTE@gmail. So Rony.caste@gmail. And just connect with me. Happy to support and share the knowledge. And stay tuned for more upcoming things, and just putting myself out there, because I feel like that was another thing. I was afraid to really step into the fullness of me, and I think I'm stepping.
Yes, I'm so happy. I keep saying yes, and you're wearing a yes shirt. But I'm like, I don't want to be pushy. Folks are ready. When they're ready, they'll come. And I'm so glad that you arrived at this point where you're feeling more comfortable and being, more public and more out and more visible, because we need more to see and hear, and learn from more folks like you. Yes.
No, and thank you. I mean, I feel like this is one of the ways, right? So being invited, being honored, and how through your platform, you're opening up opportunities. So I think I love that. That's that community care, right? Like we're using our access to help others. And I know you have other folks on our podcast. So thank you. And to others who have come on and share, right, their stories and identities.
Well, thank you so much, Rony. We'll make sure to add your contact info in the show notes. And thank you again for coming, for sharing so much, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, all the amazing things you've been doing. I wasn't kidding when I said you're one of my favorite people. And you're so full of, like, that's why I was like, when I think of Rony, I think of nurturing. Like, I think of like a big abrazo. I feel so much warmth from you. And I'm sure everybody else felt it too, or feels it too, as they listen to this episode. So gracias. I appreciate you.
Of course. Thank you to everyone. Y nos vemos pronto.
Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review of the podcast. If you leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, you become eligible for a free half-hour coaching session with me. Yes, that's right, 1 free session. Once you leave a review, you can email me a screenshot and I'll send you a link to sign up. The second way to show your love is to get yourself a copy of my free 15-page Grad School Femtoring kit, which includes resources on research, organization, grad school, and career prep. Go to gradschoolfemtoring.com/kit to get it today. The third and last way to support my show is to follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally TikTok with the handle @GradSchoolFemtoring. Thanks again, and until next time.